we use the apples for apples approach, because the thing is, the more similar the comparable property is to your property, as an example, the more reliable the valuation would be.
You're listening to the She Renovates podcast. You're listening to She Renovates, the podcast for women who want to renovate to create an income and a life they love.
Hello everyone. So today my guest is Michael Pung, who is the director of Vanguard Valuations. So Michael is a valuer. It's an independent and boutique valuations firm which specialises in valuations for stamp duty, capital gains tax, self-managed super funds, probate, family law, mediation, and more. Michael is driven by providing clients with an efficient service and timeliness in reports. And the Vanguard Valuations difference is that of putting clients and referral partners first whilst maintaining the independent integrity, which is crucial for the work. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Bernadette. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So as I mentioned to Michael, I actually put this question out to our She Renovates Facebook group and got some very juicy questions for which Michael hasn't had much notice on, but let's see how we go. So it's always a bit of an intriguing sort of field, the old property valuations. And I am really firstly interested in whether you could walk us through the process of valuing a property and the method that you typically use.
Okay, well, the process basically starts with the initial instruction from a client. So they actually ask us for valuation, provide us with the address, and indicates what the purpose for the valuation is for. So the purpose is actually important to ensure that the valuation itself is tailored towards that particular purpose. So like I said, it could be for family law, could be for taxation. So that's important. But then in terms of the actual process of the valuation itself, the valuer usually would do an internal inspection of the property. So, make notes, take photos, note the condition, the improvements, if there are any renovations done, the street appeal, and then also drive around the area as well and look at the nearby properties, look at comparables and what they're like, street appeal and so forth. Once that's done, so once the site inspection's done, they then go back to the office and type up the report, do the research, look at market trends, look at the comparable sales evidence. And the sales evidence they use would be like for like. So we use the apples for apples approach because the thing is the more similar the comparable property is to your property, as an example, the more reliable the valuation would be. And then once that's done, the valuer comes up with a single figure, which is their opinion on the fair market value.
Okay. And so when you're looking at comparative prices, other properties, I understood that there was some rule about how it had to be something that sold like 6 months ago, or is there any ruling about the timeline of that or guideline of that comparison? So if you were comparing it with something similar in the area and it had only just sold, could you take that into account?
Yes, we can. So generally we start with sales within that have sold within the last 3 months as a starting point, but it just depends on the location, how many sales there are that are similar as well. If there are few sales within the 3 months, then we expand both the time that we search back to 6 months, and then sometimes up to a year, depending on the property. But also we may need to expand the search radius as well. So on the map, you have like a radius, and we usually stick within a 500 meter radius from the subject property. But again, if there's very few sales, then we look to expand the radius to like 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, into other similar adjoining suburbs. But Sydney's quite vast as an example. So even if you're near an adjoining suburb, that suburb may not necessarily be as comparable to your property as opposed to another one. So there's a lot of fine tuning there that needs to be done.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. But really, I'm just wanting to clarify.
Yeah.
So really, the valuation is based on comparison.
Yeah, for if we're talking about residential property,
Yeah,
it is mostly the main methodology is called direct market comparison. So that's the methodology we use.
yeah, okay. So it's interesting, yeah, because I've had a few experiences with valuers that I don't think really were all that reliable. And one of the things, or some of the feedback I've had is that they wouldn't use recent sales as a comparison, even if the property was identical, like in an apartment building and so on. So yeah, but so there must be different policies from one company to another, would you think?
I think so, and I think if it is for lending, because at the moment we aren't doing valuations for lending, but I would say there is that added risk for valuations that would be considered
Yeah,
for a lending valuation.
yeah,
And in those instances, they would also they'll need to consider the sale prices of settled properties. So if they're not settled, I think there is a bit of a risk factor that okay, well maybe the
go through.
prospective purchase might just drop out, and
Yeah,
that's not a sale that can be used.
that does make sense.
Yeah.
And so you don't do valuations for finance?
No, not at the moment, but it is something that we are looking into.
Yeah.
We just got to make sure we put the infrastructure in place for that.
Yeah. And so if someone was getting a valuation, would it be appropriate for them to accompany the valuer? And do they have any opportunity to provide their input to the valuer in terms of, their understanding of the local area?
It actually depends on the purpose for the valuation.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of our clients, they know their property better than anyone really.
Yeah.
Because even if I'm local to the area, I mean I still don't know all the ins and outs, and I don't have the experience of that property. So depending on the purpose, we may seek input from the client. And those purposes could be for taxation, for example. If there's some renovations done, and they can kind of point out these improvements that were made. But yeah, if it was for family law, for example, we need to ensure that we're careful to remain independent, like fully independent in that, okay, we're not being seen as being influenced.
Yeah.
But I mean, even for taxation, we still need to be able to do our job independently, because at the end of the day, we still have a code of conduct to provide an independent valuation, which is required by the ATO or from Revenue New South Wales, or
Yeah.
or yeah, and for other purposes.
Great.
Yeah.
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 I do
But
look, I know that some are busy and overworked, and their level of integrity does drop as a result of that. I'm not suggesting that's you, but I've certainly experienced that.
yeah, I mean, we always maintain our integrity. Like we do, like sometimes if we're doing a valuation, and sometimes a client may ask questions, then we can always consider further evidence after the fact.
Yeah.
But it has to be evidence that's relevant to the valuation as well. We can't just take it willy-nilly. But yeah, if there's like reasonable evidence that they can provide us to suggest maybe a higher or lower value, then yes, we may consider that a reassessment in the value.
Yeah. And so just a little bit further on within that same line, do different valuation firms have different approaches and procedures around valuing?
Across the board, the standard methodology would be the direct market comparison, because it all stems from the definition of fair market value.
Yeah.
And that's to do with, if a willing and not too anxious buyer and a willing and not too anxious seller, and if they're not under duress, and they agree upon a value. And then the only way you can actually measure that is by market sales, because usually most market sales are what's deemed as arm's length transactions, where one party doesn't know the other party.
Yeah.
And then basically whatever price they agree upon would be a fair value within the market they're in.
Yeah. That seems to make sense.
Yeah.
I when we bought the house we live in now, it's a warehouse conversion,
Mhm.
and it had been on the market for months, and hadn't sold. So, obviously the price wasn't right. So I got a valuer to come and value it, and I couldn't be there that day. And so the valuation, I think, was on the market for 1.5 million and had been on the market for more than 3 months. And the valuation came back at 1.5 million. And I rang him and I said, I can't see how that can be right, because it's been on the market for that long for that price and it hasn't sold. And he said, oh, he had a conversation with the agent and that's what they agreed it was worth. I was livid because I'd paid like a lot of money for this valuation. And in the end, so it didn't really do a lot for my negotiations, but in the end, I paid 200,000 less. So
Okay.
yeah, but a very junior valuer.
Yeah.
So some of those big companies, I think, have students straight out of uni. So yeah.
They don't have the experience to and the know-how, and probably not sure. But I mean, they are learning. But I think maybe for a task of that, at the very least they should have another valuer who is properly reviewing that and overlooking
Yeah.
that.
Well, I came to the decision that it's not worth getting a valuation unless you're there to see that it is done appropriately, and that it's not, the agent doesn't have input into it. But anyhow, there you go. That's my gripe.
Yeah.
So in terms of renovations, what renovations, what specific improvements would you say add the most value? Do you have an opinion on that? So what sort of things do you look for in a renovated property?
Yeah, I mean, you probably would know this already. It's usually the big ticket items, or big, the in general improvements to the kitchen. So if there's renovations to the kitchen to the bathrooms, decking, street appeal, those are probably the big ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does also depend on the location as well, and type of asset too. I actually I have spoken to a renovations person recently as well, and he actually had been speaking to some agents about he's looking at renovating investment properties.
Yeah.
So like talking about apartment units, but at least going maybe early in the year, the agent said, it's not really viable at the moment, because the rental market was so hot. Any renovations that were done, you're probably not very likely to get as much of a return on investment. But I think I would say if you're clever with your renovations, and if you're mindful of the costs, and maybe doing a few things yourself, I still think that there's opportunity there to get an uplift in the
Yeah.
value. And then it depends on the market. Like if you're looking at like more prestige markets, for example, if you can get the work tastefully done with the certain types of inclusions for your property, then you may actually get quite a significant improvement. But in those instances, you're looking at probably like a broader scale renovation to the property.
I must admit, like we've been doing apartments for a while now, and I'm finding that if you're able to do an upmarket renovation on a property, depending on the building, that you can actually do quite well out of it. So we've just bought one in Potts Point, and it's a studio that we're converting into a one bedder. And the comparisons for the resale are about 300,000 more than we paid for it.
That's great. What's the floor area for that studio? roughly?
Yes, it's only about 40 square meters, or it might even be a bit less. So yeah, but I also, when I was doing the comparisons, are similarly challenged in terms of the floor area.
Mm,
So, and I probably think our market is women in their 50s.
okay.
So yeah, it's certainly not a first home buyer's property. Yeah. And even this where I'm now, this we've just sold this, and this yeah, we bought it during COVID for 370 and we've just sold it for 613. So yeah, I think there are certain buildings where I think that there is good margin, but you have to identify them, and then you also have to be able to do the renovation in a cost-effective and timely way. Yeah.
Mm. That's pretty good actually that yeah you were able to convert that studio into to one bedroom apartment.
Yeah, I know
Was
we won't talk about too much about
too much.
that,
Okay. Fair enough.
but yeah, but this is
Yeah.
a building where it's a very common improvement. So
Yeah.
it's been done multiple times,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it all seems to be going okay.
Yeah, I think it's good to. I mean, I think that's a key as well. Like if you're able to add, to a renovation, if you can add extra living space or extra functionality, that would also be a very useful improve. So very, it'll be seen positively in terms of value as well because if people value extra space or
Yeah.
another bedroom or I don't know, like say you have like a walk-in pantry, for example. Again, it's extra functionality that makes life easier, right? And
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
have that and peace of mind, really.
Yeah. And the other thing is it's really to be able to own something really beautiful in an affordable price bracket is pretty good
Mm,
too.
yes.
And the other thing is around these areas, there's a big market for short-term rental. And while that doesn't do a lot for the housing crisis, for people that are wanting to hold something maybe to use for themselves as well, then that's quite a good strategy. What about the type of title? So in terms of strata as opposed to company title, does that have much of an impact on the value?
I would say there's probably fewer company titles than yeah nowadays than it was in the past because strata titles have been the way forward. I'm not sure what was it since the 80s. It was
Yeah,
around that time, and I think the reason why there's been a move to strata title is just it allows for a more simplified ownership within a complex,
yeah,
and transfers are much easier. Whereas under a company title, yeah, basically you're buying shares into that company that owns the building, and then there's just I think just more complications with that. From a valuation standpoint, it really depends because I mean at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, we look at an apples for apples approach. So when we're looking at like I say a company titled apartment unit, we would actually look at sales of other company titled units, and then whatever the price is, it is what it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
However, where there is a shortage of company titled units, because there are pockets where okay, you might only have a very few company titled. Generally, the value would be probably a little bit more conservative on the value as opposed to a similar strata titled property.
yeah, yeah,
Again, mostly due to the potential complications under the company title.
yeah. And also, a lot of banks aren't too keen on them either, are they?
Yeah, it's just another risk factor. Like,
Yeah,
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 and I think anywhere where there's like extra risk or maybe a bit of uncertainty, yeah, it just has a negative impact on it.
yeah. What about, I've come across a few of the old system titles, so houses that are
Mm.
still under the old system. Does that have any impact on the value?
Oh, I probably would say it probably would. I personally haven't come across them myself because I would say that it's quite rare nowadays
Yeah,
because yeah, most titles are either Torrance titled or strata titled or and then company titled. But yeah, I would actually yeah, look at that as another risk factor as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about orientation or aspect. So obviously everyone wants a north-facing aspect.
Mm.
If you're not able to have that, what's the next best thing?
I would say east would be probably the next.
Yeah.
Generally because you get the morning sun and you don't get the harsh afternoon sun as you would if you had a west-facing aspect. I probably would say probably south would maybe be the least desirable, but then it depends on the outlooks as well, actually.
Yeah.
Because like if you have actually good outlooks, like sometimes the south-facing aspect might be desirable as well. Like, if you have I don't know, like say you have an apartment in Kirribilli, for example, around there,
And
your
looking at
south
the
your
harbour.
south-facing aspect is kind of the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and stuff. So in that
Yeah.
in that instance, it's quite valuable actually. It's similarly, if you have water views, again, that could, yeah, somewhat negate the aspect
Yeah.
of the aspect. But I think the reason why aspect matters is more due to, yeah, the amount of sunlight you get, really, and you can just enjoy the natural light coming to your house. But then I would also say that it also depends on how the house or how the property is designed as well to maximize the amount of light from the living space as well. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yes, in short, north, east, and then west in some instances, and then south, I would say. But I
Yeah.
don't know, what's your opinion on that?
I tend to go west before east. But yeah, there's probably not a lot in it.
Mm,
Um, what was I going to say? The other thing about water views, my understanding is that saltwater views are the premium, and
mm,
then freshwater are coming behind that.
mm. Yeah, I would say so.
Mm,
Because the saltwater views generally are probably a lot more expansive as well, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
and just naturally, it's just what we desire. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So are environmental or energy efficiencies in homes starting to get any traction in terms of adding value?
I think that there would be some considerations for that. It just depends on the location as well. But I think with the say for example, the rising, you know, utility costs, people are looking at ways of saving money, for example. So that would be of value for a property that it's energy efficient, for example.
Yeah, yeah,
So, so yeah, I would say that it would add a bit of value.
yeah. What are the biggest challenges you have as a valuer?
The biggest challenge, I think it just depends. I would say generally if there's a lack of market sales, because yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, direct market comparison is the primary method for valuations. But how do you value a property when there's no comparables?
Yeah, yeah,
So in that instance, I mean, we always do our research. We may actually call up some agents. We may need to expand our search radius. We may need to use another methodology, other methodologies as well.
yeah,
So, for example, there's a methodology we use called the summation method. So that is basically where we look at the value of the land, unimproved land, plus the improvements, and then we marry the two together.
yeah,
But that would be in fairly rare circumstances. And I would still look at market sales of land at the very least, and then
yeah,
we apply a reasonable estimate from there. But I mean, in those instances, there is more margin for error as well for
yeah,
the value.
yeah. That's like for house and land and that type of thing, new subdivisions.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah. What is the most surprising thing you found when doing evaluation? I know this is a red herring, but let's keep it
surprisingly.
interesting. Yeah,
Oh, I mean, we did a bit of research ourselves on renovations, actually, how much potential uplift there would be for certain types of properties.
yeah,
certain we actually found out, well, if you're doing sorry, not valuation, if you're actually doing some renovations in certain suburbs, in the eastern suburbs, for example,
Mm.
um there is actually quite a high likelihood of you getting a good return on your investment. Whereas like there are certain pockets in Western Sydney where actually even if you pour money into building a granny flat, renovate the kitchen, you're much less likely to see a return, and you actually might even see a loss
Yeah.
in yeah, the money that you've put in to renovating that.
That is very interesting. And I must admit, and that's why I think for our renovators, the research process is so critical
Yeah.
because, yeah, that is interesting. I must admit, I've never seen a granny flat actually add a lot of value to a property. Like, I
Right.
think you're doing well usually if you can get the value of the granny flat back. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I would say granny flats probably more for cash flow. Like if you want to
yeah,
increase
I'd agree.
the rental return. So in that respect, that's fine. But I guess you just have to know that yeah, you're probably less likely to get a return
Mm,
on that, because I think once you build a granny flat, that does limit your market a bit more as well, because not every purchaser is going to be looking for a granny flat. There's more people out there who want to just buy a freestanding house for themselves
yeah,
rather than, buying one with a granny flat, because it's actually extra cost as well, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not something people necessarily look for or need.
No, and you're stuck with it. You can't subdivide it off. It's not like something you can, subdivide and sell off. It's there forever. What about swimming pools?
I would say swimming pools. It does depend. I think it depends on the location. If there's actually a demand for swimming pools in the area, and then it just depends on how what the quality of the swimming pool is, the age, and so forth. I think also if the swimming pool has not been taken care of, that also adds to the liability factor of the swimming pool. But if it's been well done, if it's in an area where there's a market for swimming pools, I would say yes, it adds value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And my next question is a personal question.
Mhm.
What about a lift? Let's say you've got a house with 3 or 4 levels,
Mm.
uh, and you have one with a lift and one without a lift. Do you think that will add significant value?
I would say that it'll probably add value in the scheme of the other improvements that you make to the property.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, I'm just trying to think of how many properties I've actually valued that have had lifts. It's probably been a couple, I would say. But yeah, like it's I mean, it has, well, obviously you wouldn't have, if you have a need for a lift, you must have like multiple levels
yeah.
to the dwelling. But then yes, the at least the ones I valued, they've also have had significant improvements as well, significant renovations to them to just add to that overall
So
appeal. But
the home
I don't know.
consistent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if a lift on its own, but I wouldn't imagine it be on its own,
Yeah,
like be in conjunction with all
yeah.
the other improvements you make.
A high level finish.
Yeah, yeah, because that's I would consider a lift as a luxurious item to add to a property,
Yeah,
and it would work in conjunction with, I guess, the other I guess luxuries you might have in the property as well.
yeah, yeah. Okay. And so I'll make this my last question.
Mhm.
Where do you see Sydney's housing market going in the next 5 to 10 years? What trends should we be aware of?
I mean, 5 to 10 years is a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, let's
well,
say 1 year. Let's say
if
1 year. What do you think is going to happen in Sydney?
we can start from how it is at the moment, and then we can
Yeah,
kind of go from there.
yeah,
So at the moment, it seems to have just flattened a little bit, softened a little bit in the last few months. It's still growing. Like Sydney, like if you're speaking broadly, the prices are still growing, but yeah, not nearly at the rate that it was even earlier in the year. But I would say that there's always been a demand for Sydney, and I don't think that it's going to go down like significantly anytime soon. I
Yeah,
think.
I'd agree with you on that. I think
It,
it's strong. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Sydney would be probably still the premier city in Australia. I think there's a lot of demand for Sydney, but it's just interesting to see, the rise of other cities as well. I think specifically, at least in the last year or two, Perth,
Yeah.
and Brisbane,
Yeah.
because of how strong the market has been in Sydney. It seems that a lot of investors are actually they're looking into those markets because of affordability factors. Interest rates also haven't helped as well. But I
Yeah.
would say, in short, long term, Sydney will still be quite
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah. Okay, Michael, is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks for making the time to be on the podcast. You're based in Sydney, so I'll share your details with the replay. So for anyone that's wanting to engage a valuer. And yeah, thanks again for being on the show.
No worries. Thank you, Bernadette.
No worries.
This is the She Renovates podcast. To discover how to harness the power of renovating, check out the schoolofrenovating.com.